And a very warm welcome joining you tonight on this At Hyde Park special post-budget session for key analysis, highlights and takeaways of the second reading of Budget 22, which was presented this evening by Finance Minister Basil Rajapakse in his maiden budget speech. Of course, we've had a mixed a number of sentiments and messages from both the government and the opposition. Here tonight, without much ado, I thought I'd introduce to you a panel of gentlemen who will evaluate the budget and break it down to us so that we understand what is really happening and what we're looking forward to in the fiscal year ahead. Let me warmly welcome Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Mr. Ajith Nivard Cabraal. A very warm welcome. Ayubowan to you.
Ayubowan Indeewari.
And who will join us next is Mr. S.R. Attygalle, Treasury Secretary, but he will join us shortly. I presume he's still probably briefing government ministers and MPs on the budget, trying to analyze to them what's happening. And also we have with us Mr. Vish, Govindasamy, Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. A warm welcome. Ayubowan to you too. Mr. Sujeewa Rajapakse, Managing Partner of BDO Sri Lanka. A warm welcome, Ayubowan. And we're having this post-budget session together with BDO, in association with BDO. I look forward to talk to you much about the banking sector also as the Chairman of People's Bank.
Interesting.
So I welcome all of you. But firstly, I'd like to turn to our Governor. You from politics now. You're once again at the helm of as the financial regulator. But here tonight we're presenting a budget that has received a mixed number of sentiments and messages. Of course, we acknowledge that this has been an unprecedented time, not just for Sri Lanka, but world over. A lot of challenges, and here a government trying to look forward to present a budget that will bring about policy changes in order to resurrect the economy. But as we started, Finance Minister said social and economic disparities have increased, slow progress of achieving sustainable goals and increased environmental catastrophes, limitations of assistance from bilateral and multilateral institutions, and the challenges of adapting to the new normal. Now, these 5 challenges plus the loss of revenue to the country and the Treasury has been unprecedented, estimated at 500 billion rupees. With all this, we're presenting a budget. But the opposition is of the view, again, that the cost of living issue and other fundamental macroeconomic matters have not been addressed in the budget. You presented a roadmap setting out your policies for 6 months. How does this go in line with the budget? How are we looking ahead together with your roadmap and the budget presented today?
Actually, that's an excellent question and an excellent platform that you have laid, Indeewari. As you know, the budget itself is the direction of the economy for the future, and the Finance Minister will normally set out what areas would receive more attention than others, and he will also want to address those issues that you just mentioned, the issue of people having to have more incomes in their hands, the issue of the global economy having a downturn. All those are massive challenges that will have to be addressed in budget making. At the same time, you mentioned about the roadmap that the central bank put out. That is actually to ensure that the country's economy will be stable and that we will have stability in going forward. For any action to be taken, we need to ensure that there is a stable environment. So the stable environment is an important part of this entire exercise. That's why in order to ensure that there is stability, we got to take certain measures and steps, and on that platform will be what the government will be setting its stage for the next wave of development. So I think the challenge for the Finance Minister would be to bring up, as you quite rightly mentioned, the revenues. At the same time, he has to direct the revenues towards certain essential areas where it would turn into investment, and the investment to yield the growth. So these will be the challenges that have been addressed by the Finance Minister, but it will be supplemented by what the central bank has done in ensuring that the platform on which all these are built is a stable one.
But is this really possible? We hear that these are nonsensical figures, that 2021 revenue would be 2 trillion rupees, but really it's only 1.5 trillion. I'm referring to a tweet by MP Harsha De Silva of the Samagi Jana Balawegya. I would have asked this from the Treasury Secretary, but how would you evaluate this?
But I can only say that lots of those tweets have been proved to be absolutely wrong. So I don't want to get into a controversy with him, but he has been in the habit of making these tweets, fairly expensive tweets, if I may say, but ultimately when those don't materialize, there's nobody to go and ask him whether that was really true or not. The essence of it is the finance minister and the finance ministry takes responsibility for those figures. Someone can criticize it and someone can say, no, it's not going to happen. But they must first of all lay down a figure and then move towards that, in the same way that you would have noticed in our roadmap. We set out certain numbers that we thought were the ones that need to be addressed and delivered, and then you work towards that. Sometimes the person who is outside may not really even know how that is going to be delivered. So I think I wouldn't use the word nonsensical. I would say that those are challenges. And if there is a challenge, well, that's up to the finance minister and the finance ministry to work on those challenges and to deliver the figures. And I think we should give them the chance to do that.
I'd like to turn to Mr. Vish Govindasamy, Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. We also hear that our Treasury Secretary is here in studio, so until he arrives, I'd like to turn to you. We understand, we saw press releases that the Finance Ministry had consulted 102 organizations and entities prior to the budget. I have a few questions for you. Was there involvement from the business community, from the organizations that the Chamber represents? What kind of representation have you made? And do you see that reflected in this budget, or are you disappointed? Are you satisfied? And why? Because we have limited questions, I have another to you. The surcharge tax levied, what is your opinion on that?
Okay, so I'll start with your first question. The government does consult us, and we did make representations, very detailed representations on areas that we thought that needs certain importance and adjustments, etc. And we must be very fair. We also got a very good hearing from the finance minister as the Ceylon Chamber, and we were able to candidly discuss the issues that the business community is facing, and he took good note of it. I must say the most important thing, and I must congratulate that for the government for not meddling around with the taxes. And it is something that we said there must be policy consistency, and year after year, if the taxes are meddled with, then it becomes very difficult to do business as it is. So in that score, I don't think, usually in any budget, that's the first thing, the taxes get changed, rates get changed, the methods get changed. So he assured us that this time it will not happen, and they have kept it. Going back to your surcharge, again, it's a one-time tax, whether it's necessary. I guess, there's a huge deficit. The government has to come up with that. As businesses, yes, it's going to be very hard on those 62 businesses that he mentioned, but what else is the government going to do? I mean, where are they going to get that income from? So in that sense, I don't know what else to tell you on that, but it's going to be hard on the businesses, but it's hard on the government as well. And they have to
But the utilization of these funds, where it will go into, what kind of concern do you have as the private sector and the business community?
Well, I think it's going to bridge the deficit. I don't think it's going into the general fund. I don't think it's going anywhere else. From what I understand, I think the better person to answer that question will be the Secretary Treasury as to where it's going. But there are other things, as the real question that the business community is facing now is the import restrictions and the availability of foreign currency, etc., didn't get addressed. So that's something that we will have to engage and find out how we go forward on that.
Turning to Mr. Sujeewa Rajapakse, I did say I'd like to touch on the banking sector first with you. There was mentioned that the support of the banking sector to the SMEs are not seen here. When we look at that going forward with this budget and also the available infrastructure and facilities, how do we resurrect the lifeline of the Sri Lankan economy, the SMEs? What kind of support, especially from the state banks, is possible given the framework of this budget that was presented?
Thanks, Indeewari. What you need to understand here is, now any country SME sector represents about 60-65% of the total the economy. I am very happy to see that Honorable Minister Basil Rajapakse has brought certain proposals to resurrect this SME sector, which is very important. But looking at from bankers' point of view, any bank, I think they really focus SME sector, including People's Bank. Why do I say that? Because we have large number of SME customers, where we have, even after pandemic, once the pandemic was hit here in Sri Lanka, we have brought quite a lot of new loan schemes, facilities, and then rehabilitation kind of the operations have been done. So as a result, I mean, one cannot say that bankers have never been in the forefront of the helping SME sector. But again, SME sector also need to understand that bankers also dealing with public money. It's not bankers or the capital that we get from either Treasury being state-owned bank or the shareholders who basically pump money. So we need to make sure that we safeguard the depositors' money. So, but by and large, I must tell you that we have been really, the helping SME. In the meantime, I must tell the central bank has brought a new rule, Governor, that our loan portfolio should have at least 20% loans from SME sector, which is again significant, and one of the very, very important rules that have been brought into banking sector. So in the meantime, if you talk about today's budget, there are quite a lot of proposals, the focusing SME sector, which is a welcoming thing looking at from my BDO point of view, I must tell you, Indeewari.
Right. I look forward to discussing all of that. But prior to that, let's take a short commercial break here at Hyde Park, and we'll be right back with our post-budget analysis. Welcome back to our At Hyde Park special, evaluating and analysing Budget 2022. A warm welcome to you, Treasury Secretary, who's joining us on the panel. And I'd like to turn to you. We've spoken to the rest of the panel, and I understand you'll be able to give us an analysis on facts and figures. But firstly, about the imposition of a one-off surcharge tax at a rate of 25% on individuals or companies. Now, we understand that 62 companies here will be contributing to this. But don't you think companies will also feel uncomfortable, especially with there's a massive burden of state-owned enterprises here that need to be revived, where their contribution is minimal, but yet some of these biggest, largest contributors are contributing 25%. But how are we going to manage this accumulation? Where is it going from? Do we have a stringent mechanism there?
Right. Before answering your question, I think I will just try to articulate the pillars, which I say about 5 pillars that we identify in the budget. So there would be some answers for your questions also when I answer this. So what I see in the budget, it's built on 5 pillars, as I mentioned. One would be the supporting the vulnerable in a targeted manner. Then there are certain reforms, both for the private sector and the public sector. Then strengthening the fiscal position, also strengthening the external sector. And broadly speaking, it's a shift that the minister wants or the government wants towards the manufacturing sector from the normal trading economy that we are in. So those are the 5 pillars that I would like to elaborate on. One, as I think I think all must have told about this, that is the support the vulnerables groups as in a targeted manner. There, I think, especially after the COVID pandemic, there were certain sectors, certain groups that were affected, and especially the Honorable Minister has mentioned about, I will mention 3 sectors there. That is the normal, the 3-wheelers, the bus owners, school vans. So it's a more targeted benefits or support given to groups where the COVID has hit badly. Then also in the budget speech, he has mentioned about the Samurdhi system. There, Samurdhi system presently is just a consumption-based thing. So he's taking a broader view there, and he's talking about savings and investment. So the Samurdhi movement to be converted into a savings investment, that type of activity, or deviating from the present consumption thing. And he has talked about certain Samurdhi Bank, etc., how he's going to do that. So I'm not going to deliberate those things. Then also there is another item introducing a contributory pension scheme for people who do not have that already. So those are, broadly speaking, the targeted support package given in the budget. Then I will move to the reform side also. There, again, you must have seen about the pension reforms that he has mentioned about extending the age limit. That's a reform. Then also there's a proposal for the procurement procedures. This I'm talking about the public sector. Procurement procedures to be simplified and brought in the line of, say, World Bank ADB style procurement. Because the complaint is, although we allocate funds, the procurement delays. So on the ground, these things won't happen as we want, the speed that is there. So that the procurement procedure, a new procurement procedure will be, or simplified procurement procedure will be brought in. Then from the private sector side, right, there, I think, free port concept has been brought in. That is, this for the enterprise trade, because this is a hub. Our country is a naval hub. So to make use of that, the free port concept has been brought in. Then there are a lot of support given to exporters. So exporters will be, there would be a rating, like the credit rating, they will be rated. That is, rating would be done through chambers and the government people will rate them, and so then they will get the benefits because there's a hassle for them. So exporters will be looked after like that. Also, presently, if you take importers and exporters, for authorization, they have to go to several places, several government institutions, quarantine, import-export control, etc., etc. So what we have done here is, what the Honorable Minister is suggesting is, that is to short-circuit this. He has identified about 1,700 line items where the key agency, say standards, that's only the place where, and then straight to the customs. So that's a big reform. If you talk to an exporter or an importer, they will say that's more than enough for us, right? So that's a big hassle. So that will be happening. Then also rating I mentioned, HS code simplifications, etc. There are a whole heap of. Then coming to your question, right? You mentioned about the one-off taxes.
Yes.
They are, again, I think in 2019, when the new government came, there was a simplification in the tax system. And in the 2021 budget, that is this year budget, also Honorable Prime Minister, then Finance Minister, has clearly mentioned that we are not going to change these in a broader sense, right? Change these taxes. There should be a continuity. Otherwise, the investors, because ad hoc changes won't help. But given the circumstances here, that's why we have clearly mentioned these are one-off taxes, right? So this surcharge tax that you asked is a one-off tax where the whole society underwent, the government has immensely put a lot of money for.
But isn't there a commitment from the state-owned enterprises to also to be revived, to contribute?
Yeah, they are also, the Honourable Minister has mentioned about the SOEs. He has clearly mentioned that they have to pull up their socks in layman's language, where the management has to take this into control. And also, again, there are certain reforms identified there also. That is, lot of underutilized assets that they hold on, which if they can dispose this would improve their balance sheet. So that will answer part of your questions also. So broadly, I think I will stop here and then you can ask.
I'd actually like to turn to the governor. Again, I spoke about a few mismatches of the budget, and opposition expressed that the budget does not address the country's fundamental issues, is something that is discussed now post-budget among the opposition. It says that the budget deficit and the Forex crisis is not addressed. But I'd like to turn to ask you now, we're talking about growth, we're talking about parameters that we're trying to achieve, and in line with some international expectations also, in whether we want to go in for borrowings or seek international support. As a central bank governor, again I turn to your roadmap and the next year. How are we going to balance this out if there is so much of concern in terms of addressing the fundamental issues in the country and trying also to manage that international front?
The very fact that there are various constraints is the reason why we have to balance them. If we were to only concentrate on one particular area in Indeewari, what it would do is we would probably get that right, but the rest of it will probably not get done. So that's why economics is all about a balance. You got to ensure that you have a balance amongst all these macro fundamentals. Sometimes you need to sacrifice one to some extent in order to ensure that there is stability in the other. So that's the balance that we are all talking about. The government has to address it, we have to address it. You quite rightly mentioned, yes, there is a foreign exchange shortage which we need to address. We need to address our income, which is the Treasury Secretary just mentioned about the fiscal deficit. We have to address that. We have to ensure that there is new incomes coming into the country, new incomes coming into the government. So all these are challenges. So in that context, we got to find the real sweet spot. We sometimes call it the Goldilocks spot, where it's not too hot, not too cold, just right, in order to ensure that there is a certain flow which will take place. So that's the challenge, and we see a lot of those challenges surfacing right now, mainly because the 5 areas that the finance minister mentioned at the beginning of his speech, that there are these concerns: the global context, the local context, the need to ensure that the poor are protected. All these are very, very vital items of the whole exercise. So when we are doing that, we need to look at how we are going to increase revenues. At the same time, how are we going to ensure that there is sufficient foreign exchange? We need to have foreign exchange in order to import all the items that we have to import. Not everything is not a non-essential. We got so many items that we need to import which are essential for the exports to also to take place. Exports, for it to take place, you need to have enough of energy. Energy needs to be generated with oil, generated through coal. So those have to be imported. You have to import the gas. So there are a wide range of items within an economy which needs to be addressed at the same time. Now when you are doing that, of course there will be a trade-off. Sometimes you have to have one of, not too much of one and deprive the other. So the roadmap that we also set out is a very important part of this whole exercise, because A, it ensures that people know what the central bank is doing and what the government is also doing. It also tells that we have a plan in order to ensure that the stability that you spoke of is there. At the same time, the government's budget will tell you how are we going to generate the revenues, where are we going to invest. Now, a large chapter of the finance minister's speech is based on how the new development activities are going to take place and what areas the activities are going to take place. So those are important for people to know. Now, when you have that plan, sometimes those can be looked at from an outsider, and they might even have different priorities. So that's why a government will have to set out the priorities, tell the people these are the priorities that we are hoping to implement, and then the parliament, in its wisdom or otherwise, will have to pass it so that that becomes the plan of action for the next 1 year. So that is what has been done. The finance minister has now, with the consent of the cabinet, put forward the plan for the next 1 year. It is part of the entire program of the government, which is called the Vistas of Prosperity of the President, and that will be the plan of action that the Treasury Secretary and all of the other secretaries as well as the ministries will have to implement during that 1 year in order to generate the outcomes that we have spoken of. In fact, I was very happy that the finance minister had also spoken about results-based activities as well, because you got to deliver the results, not just say I have spent this amount of money. The money has to be spent in order to deliver a particular result. That's what it is all about. So that has also been addressed, and I think that's a good thing, so that at the end of the day, we'll be able to say, we have delivered these, and then that's the accountability that comes in.
We don't have much time, but I'd like, before we go in to a short break again, contribution from the other panelists too. I know Mr. Govindasamy was expressing satisfaction and acceptance over certain proposals of the budget, but raised concern about the lack of focus on the import restrictions, as well as I think the budget had failed to look into certain areas. I
mentioned the Forex.
The Forex issue. Yeah. But the Governor and I think Treasury Secretary, if from the Governor, what I want to ask is, with the central bank trying to achieve certain parameters, again, at the end of the year, and the Finance Secretary, how are we going to look into these burning issues of the private sector, the engine of growth of Sri Lanka? How are we going to address these underlying tensions?
We have already done that to a great extent. If you have noticed, the rupee is reasonably stable. We have seen, of course, certain fluctuations that are taking place in the grey market. But at the end of the day, even with difficulties, even with tourism still not kicking in, as you know, tourism, and even the finance minister had mentioned that, provides us with a foreign exchange revenue of around $4.5 billion in a good year. Now, without having that, we have been able to manage for 2 years, which is a massive factor in our overall management of the finances. So this year, yes, there has been challenges because of the fact that the large component of the foreign income has been lost, but that's why the vaccination program, as well as the quick rollout of that, will probably ensure that the tourism can get back, even to a certain extent, which will ensure that there is growth in that sector again. Now, even without the tourism sector, Sri Lanka will record a growth of around 5% this year. And next year, hopefully, if we can get 6% on that growth of already had growth of 5%, that would be an incredible growth, because that would need to be supplemented with tourism as well. So that is why the government has to take certain steps to ensure that the COVID expenditure is not wasted. COVID expenditure is actually going to yield results, and sometimes those will need some fairly tense measures in order to deliver a number, especially the fiscal deficit, which will be of some reasonable magnitude, so that still Sri Lanka can go forward.
Right. We'll take a short commercial break. Be right back. Welcome back. I'd like to turn to Mr. Sujeewa Rajapakse, Chairman of People's Bank as well as BDO Managing Partner. I think I'd like to touch on the sentiment that was expressed about the government's interest to promote innovations and a manufacturing-led economy. Then again, we're talking about our state-owned banks. What kind of contribution do you see is enabled through these banks too, in order to make a bigger impact in contributing to the economy as we look at managing a forex crisis and going to the international market as well?
See, Indeewari now being a state-owned enterprise or the bank, I think we have been supporting the government right throughout. You name it, the petroleum imports or pharmaceutical imports, coal imports, or many more imports, all have been routed through People's Bank and Bank of Ceylon. And one, I saw, apart from this sustainable development goals and many proposals brought in for expenditure management, which we just touched. Also, the budget speech also talks about having digitalized kind of system in banks, which is very important, and I think government needs to make sure that the virtual, the platforms are going to be used more and more. Even if People's Bank, we have quite a lot. I think we are #1 where the digital platforms are concerned, and ATMs, CDMs, and I think government doesn't want customers to go to banks. Now we need to have virtual kind of bank branches, which is very, very important, and through that, A, you can reduce the cost of transaction, B, you don't need people to go physically, C, there's going to be a huge improvement in your efficiencies. That's what I think we were talking about, that expenditure management and things like that. So that's going to be a major paradigm shift. Another thing I would like to touch, since because of the limited time, the green bonds. I think the budget speak talks about the green bond, which is very, very important as of today, because today is the last day of this COP26 sustainable, the conference which just concluded in Glasgow. I think in midst of many challenges, I think if you are going to bring these green bond issues and things like that, which People's Bank already in, and we are discussing with the Ceylon Electricity Board governor, because to bring green bonds and to issue green bonds. I think that's another important thing that I would like to stress. So through those mechanisms, I am sure that we'll be able to have more and more efficient services. Another one I would like to touch, the bankers are going to be whacked about 25% additional taxes, I think, because that's another one we need to understand, provided you have 20 billion bottom line. Not this year, but based on previous year, Mr. Attygalle, am I correct? So there also we need to, of course, in my case, being state-owned bank, from this pocket to that pocket. But when it comes for private sector, it may not be so. Need to understand, I heard that this is, I think, only one-off payment. Yes. But again, that will have some kind of impact to our balance sheet, because my balance sheet is about 2.4 trillion balance sheet, where we go to international market for borrowings based on the strength of the balance sheet. So this will have some impact, but of course, as Mr. Attygalle said, there are some specific proposals that have been put forward for those, things that the government needs, the funding. I think that's what I would like to say.
So if this trickles down to create bigger repercussions in the economy, this one-off tax, again, before I turn to ST, Mr. Govindasamy, also I think you had some concerns in terms of the private sector, apart from accepting some proposals, but without mid to long-term assurances on these the import restrictions to be managed, and the forex crisis, and the people too expected some sort of relief, but that was not seen in terms of a reduction of prices or anything in that matter. But we can turn to the government side, the authorities, to ask them what really would help us there. But as the private sector, what do you really have to say going forward in terms of achieving those mid to long-term targets that you expect?
So I think, some of the things were already done, because there was lots of shortages. I think government finally understood price controls are not going to work. So that was taken out, but that has obviously passed on to the consumer, but at least now you have the products, and hopefully that will continue to be there. We also saw the government is making an attempt to reduce expenditure. You have seen, I think fuel, telephone, etc. is being reduced, but we would have liked to have seen more reduction in cost. I don't know, ST just said there's a reform in the pension and the age going to 65. We need more explanation of that, what exactly that means. If it is going to cost more to the government by people extending to work till 65 and getting pension, then that's going to be more cost to the government. So hopefully we'll get more clarity on that. And this 3% social security tax, whether it's 2.5 or 3, it mentioned in a couple of places different. If it's 2.5 ST, that also we need to know where exactly it's going to go. Because we can pay a social security tax if our employees are going to benefit from it in some way, then it'll be nice. But if it's going to go to the general fund and nobody's going to see what exactly where it's going, then that's also it's going to be a burden. The import restrictions are, ST very correctly said, we are a trading nation. We are moving towards a manufacturing thing. I think it's a good thing, but we also need breathing space. The traders need to have breathing space. Their livelihoods, vulnerable people addressed, very good. But the traders are also vulnerable right now because lots of their businesses are wiped out. They need to get back on their feet. I know the governor said some of those were cleared up, a lot of the containers that were stuck. The government pumped in $50 million. Goods came into the system, but then it was one-off. We need to see, we know it's difficult for the central bank to intervene like that they used to do in the past, but we need a solution.
But overall, just in a nutshell, does the private sector believe there should have been more reforms or measures taken to achieve your expectations?
I think, yes, there should have been more reform. I think we expected a much more investment into the digital economy. ST talked about one single window, etc. A lot of that can be achieved through a digital mechanism, right? If we can stop running from place to place, if we can do it through all digitally, it's a lot easier than us going from pillar to post. So those things, maybe it's in the right direction, but we have to be more aggressive in getting some of those done.
Did we fail to look into these concerns that the private sector are raising, the digital economy? I'd like the governor and ST to address these areas that we're talking about.
I think government has addressed these things. He mentioned about you mentioned about the prices reduction. There are also, it has been a targeted approach that the government has taken. There is this support given to the vulnerable groups. 15 billion has been allocated for that. So there would be a sahana malla for these the lower the segment of the society. Because and the other one he mentioned was about the digitalization. Lot of investment is being identified or has been identified, so those things will happen. I mentioned about the reforms in the custom trade facilitation side. I think that's an important area. He mentioned about the single window thing, so those will be fast tracked. Definitely, that single window would change. It's a in a way game changer, right? So we are pushing with some foreign support there. So those things are happening, and also we have to understand. Government has heavily invested in this whole society, where the private sector is also a part of it. Their shops, their factories, their offices are opened, right? Because government went on a full vaccination program, where government has invested a lot, right? So that I think the private sector is appreciating that. So these some sort of revenue has to be brought into the system, in the sense to the government, to do a lot of things, right? So that's what So it's a win-win situation, what I feel.
Right. For the larger benefit of the private sector, which drives the economy to provide that ecosystem, how do you think we can enable this?
No, I am not blaming anybody, but this is the private sector and public sector. It's in a way interlinked, right? So government facilitate the infrastructure, the environment, right? So they work on that. So to do this, you need funds, right?
So ST, that's
so it's all in one.
I think
ST, you're absolutely right, and that's why we are turning to you saying, solve the Forex problem.
Yeah, that is,
right?
That we understand. So that will also gradually...
some of the restrictions that you
that's
have
a good point that
I think Governor has something to address.
When you talk about solving the problem, Vish, it also means that all have to cooperate.
Obviously, sir.
So you can't be only solving a problem with the government stepping in.
No.
It is a problem that needs to be solved with importers, with exporters, with borrowers, with lenders, with people who are remitting money, with everyone. Now, sometimes when people look at solutions, they look at it from only their point of view. And they think, okay, this problem must be solved by everybody else other than myself. Now, I think that mentality we need to get away from. We need to ensure that there is a certain solution, and for that solution, that there must be all parties being a party to
We have
that,
about 30
and
seconds. We have about 30 seconds, I think. But we look forward to a greater platform where the private sector, the public sector can come together and look forward to another discussion. But any final comments before we wrap up the show that were not mentioned by either the...
I think we wrapped up everything. Just to say that this is a collective effort, and everyone needs to put their weight into this.
From the private sector side, we are there to assist the government all the way, and as long as we can work together, and it's one country, we need to be there together.
So that's, I think,
That's the bottom line.
Public sector reforms will have to be monitored 100%, because I am very happy about what they have brought in. So we need to make sure that we monitor it properly.
Thank you very much to our panel. Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Mr. Ajith Nivard Cabraal, Treasury Secretary, Mr. S.R. Attygalle. Also joining us, Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Vish Govindasamy, as well as Mr. Sujeewa Rajapakse, Managing Partner of BDO Sri Lanka, who is also supporting us in bringing together this panel discussion in association with At HydePark on Ada Derana 24. Thank you for watching us. We'll bring to you another segment of a post-budget analysis here at Hyde Park. Thanks for watching. Good night.